Train the muscles, not the joints. Welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding, and I don't know what I want to say today. You know, the challenge of the internet is that there's so much stupidity on it, and I find that you spend so much time, instead of just sharing what you know worked, you know something deep in your bones, you produced a result in yourself and in other people, and then the internet's almost this place where people just come in and say, hey, look, a bird. Now compare what you know to that bird. Why aren't you that bird? Why don't you have feathers like the bird? Why don't you have wings? Why don't you tweet and make sounds in the trees like the other birds do? You know, like a lot of stuff is not really relevant, right? So it's the same way studies work. People will say, well, what about this study over here? What about that study over there? I wasn't there when they conducted the study, and I wasn't there to make sure all the variables were constant and that everything made sense, right? So when they say full range of motion, then I actually would assess what they mean by full range of motion. Because, like I said to you guys before, I believe in full range of motion. I believe in full range of motion. It's just that I believe also that full range of motion is relative, and the range that is full for you will be different than somebody else. I can bend over like this. Okay? You should be able to do that. What's wrong with you? The range that is full for you will be different than somebody else, depending on what your goals are. So I believe in something called efficient range of motion, where there's this range of motion where you access the highest percentage of as many different muscle groups as possible in that movement. Makes sense, right? I mean, if I'm squatting ass to the grass, which I did that for 2 years, and what happened was my ass grew and my medialis by my knee grew, but my legs actually shrunk. So according to a study that was supposedly just published, which really means nothing to me because there's other studies out there that actually oppose this study and say the opposite. So which one do you believe, right? Which one are you supposed to believe? But I believe the study that I conducted in my own body. And what I did was that I did these excessive range of motion squats to say, hey, why don't I give this a shot? Why don't I try it out? And I did it for 2 years, and my legs actually shrunk, my ass grew, and my knees hurt all the time. So in the end, it wasn't an efficient range of motion for me, but it might be for somebody else, right? And that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying there's one range. I'm never saying that. I'm saying there's an efficient range for you. So those of you who have listened to this 1,000 times from me, keep listening, because you're going to get a piece of information here that is going to be very relevant. CrossFit, how do you access the greatest number of muscles in a movement? And there's going to be a perfect range for that. So if you're squatting all the way down to the ground and you find your lower back's giving out way before your legs do, well, guess what? Maybe your lower back is going to become the weak link, and then your legs are never going to be challenged enough to grow. Now, the same could be said if you do a really shallow range of motion. If you do this, just short little movements of 1 inch, your medialis also just gets hit. But maybe that doesn't access as many muscle fibers as you could because it's not the perfect or ideal range of motion for you. It's not the most efficient range of motion, you see? But there is a range of motion where you access the greatest percentage of all the different muscles that are involved in that movement. And only through feeling your way through the movement and then assessing also your results will you know what that range of motion is. So if you're doing a squat workout or you're doing a bench press workout, but then you're leaving and you're having nothing but joint pain, but your muscles are just slightly sore, but your joints are killing you, how likely do you think it will be that you'll be able to continue lifting weights? Like, how long do you think that'll last before something snaps, right? It's really common sense. If I punch myself in the face, eventually I'll get a black eye, right? It's the same way with a movement. If you overstretch a movement, that's actually how you tear something. Contrary to what the stupid people on the internet are saying. They're saying constant tension tears muscles. Constant tension doesn't tear muscles. And shortened range of motion doesn't tear muscles. Shortened range of motion with an unstable joint and a lot of momentum bouncing, that might tear a muscle, but not the less of a range of motion. What do you think? A couple sets of triceps. You're gonna frown when you pose, right? That makes it look real. It's like more intense. That doesn't tear a muscle. Most of the time when a guy tears a muscle, it's when he's coming all the way down on the bench and then he lifts off on that bottom. And he goes just a little bit lower and then overstretches. So the chest is already stretched, the delt's stretched, and then he goes that extra little bit and then has to overstretch that area, and then you hear a pop or something happens, right? So as you guys also know, if you've been watching this channel for a while, there was a couple months there, I was touching my chest with a bench. I got the same amount of reps as I was when I wasn't touching my chest. And all I was getting was a little bit of shoulder discomfort, but actually my chest wasn't coming up. I was actually accessing a little bit more delt, but I wasn't getting any more chest recruitment. And my goal on bench press is to try to get more chest recruitment. So there you go. Another example of efficient range of motion, right? Efficient range of motion. So got a double fold. Not good.
I recorded that.
Not good. There's this big fad on the internet right now, which is a good one. This is a good one, you know, and a couple bigger channels are talking about it, you know. Stuff that I've been talking about for, well, since 1994, I've been talking about this. Really, I've been talking about this. Like they're saying, oh, look at me, I'm doing rack deadlifts. Eureka, look at me, my traps are growing. My God, it's way better than normal deadlifts. Well, no shit. Because if you're coming down all the way to the ground, that's going to be a lot harder on a different muscle group than maybe the one that you want to hit. And if you want to hit traps, you want traps to hit failure. You want traps to hit fatigue. You don't want your lower back to hit fatigue, right? Your lower back is just a, by the way, assistant in the whole movement, but you don't want it to hit fatigue long before your traps do. It's just common sense. So it makes sense that there will be efficient ranges of motion also to hit the muscle groups that you want to hit. And that's why you see me when I'm doing close grip bench. I don't touch my chest with the bar because I find when I come down to 90 degrees at the elbow and then push up, it involves the most amount of tricep and the least amount of shoulder and chest. If I come down lower, then I have to bring my elbows in a little bit, and now the curve of how the bar comes down is different, and now I involve more front delt, and I don't want to involve more front delt. This is how you can approach your training. You can actually develop a strategy, and there is no wrong approach, but I will say this, there's no such thing as full range of motion in the way people are telling you. There's a lot of people out there that are saying there's one way to train, there is one full range of motion. Well, from each individual, there's a different range that will be their full range for what muscles they want to hit, right? And even powerlifters are known for having the proper range of motion, but are they really doing full range? I mean, when you're doing a deadlift from the floor and you're using 45-pound plates, the bar is that far from the floor, right? So wouldn't it be better to use 10-pound plates and now you're even closer to the floor? Wouldn't that be more of a full range? Well, yeah, it would be more of a full range, but does that mean it will be a more efficient way to train your body? That's not always the case. Maybe for one person, but not always for the next person. Some people, it overstretches an area that's already stretched. You know, we can all agree that you can stretch an area of your body to a certain point, and then after that point, then we are in danger of injury. Right? Different people have different flexibility levels, but even then, even if your flexibility was the best flexibility it could possibly be, there is still a point to where there's a risk of injury once you overstretch an area. Right? It's the whole practice of jiu-jitsu. I mean, it's common sense. When you're training to stimulate the muscle, but not overstretch it or pull it out of the bone. That's the point. So like I said, all I'm here to do is to share with you what worked and what didn't work. And what I saw worked with some people and what didn't work. And of course, there were always subtle variables and exceptions to every rule because people were built differently. And that's something I really noticed. There wasn't always one rule for everyone. And if somebody's telling you there's one rule for everyone, that means they're not really a trainer and they're not really open-minded and they don't really understand how training works, right? The advanced people always know that the law of individuality applies. You know, Fred Hatfield talked about this and he was Dr. Squat, right? Different people would have to lift in different ranges of motion depending on what was going on in order for them to have the most efficient way of hitting all the muscles or recruiting as much of the system as possible without injuring themselves. So yeah, I hope this helps you out. I hope you have a great time training. Thanks a lot for watching and take care for now.